The Valkyrie Dominion had conquered 12 star systems across 10,000 years of expansion. And in all that time, they had never encountered a species they could not break. Their bodies stood 8 feet tall, covered in dark blue scales that shifted color with their moods. And their forearms ending in clawed hands had torn apart countless civilizations that dared to resist their rule. Supreme hegemon Thalvex sat upon his throne in the capital world of Velkar Prime, surrounded by the trophies of 100 conquered peoples. And he listened as his advisors brought news of a discovery that would change everything. "We have detected signals from a distant system," the lead scientist reported, her scales flickering with excitement. Radio waves carrying information, clearly artificial in origin, originating from the third planet of a yellow star, approximately 40 light-years from our borders. Thalvex leaned forward with interest, his 4 eyes narrowing as he studied the data being projected before him. "How old are these signals?" he asked. "The strongest ones are barely a century old." "Supreme Hegemon," the scientist replied. "This species has only recently discovered how to broadcast their presence to the stars, and they have been screaming into the void without any understanding of who might be listening." A ripple of amusement passed through the assembled council members, their scales shifting to the yellow-green of contempt. Thalvavs had seen this pattern before, and it always ended the same way. Young species would discover radio technology and begin sending signals outward, never imagining that the universe contained predators who listened for exactly such transmissions. It was how the Valkyrie had found 7 of their 12 conquered systems, simply by following the noise that foolish civilizations made when they first reached for the stars. "What do we know of this species?" Thalvex demanded. The scientists manipulated the projection controls, and images appeared before the council. Images decoded from the radio signals themselves. The creatures were small and soft, standing on 2 legs with only 2 arms. And their bodies were covered in some kind of fabric rather than natural armor. They appeared weak and fragile. And Thalvex felt his scales shift to the deep purple of anticipation. "They call themselves humans," the scientist explained. "They inhabit a world they name Earth, and their technology appears to be primitive by our standards, with chemical rockets and basic nuclear power being their most advanced achievements." "How primitive?" asked Fleet Commander Sarvith, a female of considerable reputation who had led the conquest of 3 systems herself. "They have not yet established permanent colonies beyond their home world," the scientist replied. "They have sent a few exploratory missions to their nearest planetary neighbor, but they remain essentially confined to a single planet." The council chamber erupted in sounds of derision. A species that had not even colonized their own system was hardly worth the effort of conquest, some argued, while others pointed out that the Valkyrie had a sacred duty to bring order to all inferior race. Thalvex raised one clawed hand, and silence fell immediately. "We will conquer them," he declared, "not because they pose any threat, but because it is our nature to expand, to dominate, to rule over all lesser beings." He turned to Sarvith with a gesture of command. "Assemble a fleet," he ordered. 400 ships should be more than sufficient for such a primitive species, and I want this world brought under our control within 2 cycles of your arrival." Sarvith bowed her head in acceptance, her scales shifting to the bright red of eagerness for battle. "It will be done, Supreme Hegemon," she said. "These humans will learn what it means to draw the attention of the Valkyrie Dominion." The construction of the invasion fleet began immediately, drawing ships from across the Dominion's vast territory, massive carrier vessels, capable of deploying thousands of ground troops, sleek destroyer craft armed with weapons that could crack a planet's crust, support ships carrying supplies for a prolonged campaign, and Sarvith's own flagship, the Eternal Conquest, a vessel so large it could be seen from planetary surfaces as it passed overhead. The fleet gathered at the edge of Valkyrie space over a period of several months. And when all 400 ships had arrived, they presented a sight that would have terrified any species in the known galaxy SAR. Veth stood on the bridge of the Eternal Conquest and looked out at the assembled might of her people. "Begin final preparations," she commanded. "We launch for the Sol system in 3 rotations." Her officers moved to obey, and Sarveth allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She had conquered 3 star systems in her career, and each conquest had brought her greater glory and status within the Dominion. This mission would be the easiest of all. A simple matter of overwhelming a primitive species that probably did not even understand they were being invaded until Valkyrie troops were marching through their cities. The only challenge would be the journey itself. Sol system lay at the very edge of the territory the Valkyrie had explored, and the fleet would need to travel for 18 months at their maximum sublight velocity to reach it. Faster than light travel remained beyond even Valkyrie science, a limitation that frustrated Thalvex to no end. But sublight engines could still achieve tremendous speeds that made interstellar conquest merely slow rather than impossible on the day of departure. Thalvex himself addressed the fleet through a system-wide broadcast. "Warriors of the Dominion," his voice echoed through every ship. "You carry the honor of our people to a distant star, and you will return with a new world under our banner. The humans are primitive and weak," he continued. "They have no understanding of the forces that move through the galaxy, and they will fall before you like grain before the harvest. But do not grow complacent," he warned. "Even the weakest prey can sometimes bite, and I expect you to conduct this campaign with the professionalism that has made our people masters of 12 systems. Go now with my blessing," he concluded, "and return victorious." The fleet engaged their engines in perfect synchronization. 400 points of light accelerating away from Valkyrie space and into the darkness between Star Serveth watched the stars streak past as her ship built up speed, and she allowed herself to imagine the conquest to come. She would land her troops in the humans' largest population centers and demand immediate surrender if they complied. She would be merciful by Valkyrie standards, taking only half their population as slaves and leaving the rest to serve as a workforce for Dominion resource extraction if they resisted. She would make examples of their cities until the survivors understood the futility of opposition. It was a simple plan, one that had worked countless times before, and Sarveth saw no reason why it should fail against such an obviously inferior species as Bezpis. The fleet settled into its long journey. She retired to her quarters to review the intelligence reports on human civilization one more time. The more she learned about them, the less impressed she became. They fought wars among themselves constantly, divided into hundreds of competing nations that could not even agree on basic matters of governance. Their weapons were crude, their tactics unsophisticated, and their understanding of the universe laughably incomplete. They apparently still debated whether intelligent life existed elsewhere in the cosmos, completely unaware that the answer was racing toward them at a significant fraction of the speed of light. Seraph composed a ritual declaration of subjugation, the formal announcement that Valkyrie custom required before any conquest. To the species known as humans, she dictated, "Know that the Valkyrie Dominion has claimed your world and all its resources as our rightful property. Resistance is not merely futile but foolish," she continued, "for we have broken civilizations far greater than yours and added them to our eternal empire. Prepare for our arrival," she concluded, "and pray to whatever gods you worship that you find the wisdom to submit without forcing us to demonstrate the full extent of our power." She transmitted the message toward the Sol system, knowing it would arrive years before her fleet did not that she expected any meaningful response. What could primitives possibly say that would matter to the might of the Valkyrie Dominion? The fleet sailed on through the endless dark. 400 instruments of conquest, carrying 10 million warriors toward a world that did not yet understand its doom was approaching, and Sarvith slept peacefully. Dreaming of the glory that awaited her, she could not have known that her fleet had already been detected. She could not have imagined that something was watching from the darkness ahead, and she certainly could not have conceived that the human she dismissed as primitive had been waiting for this moment for a very, very long time. 3 months into the voyage, the Valkyrie fleet crossed an invisible boundary that their navigation systems marked as the outer edge of the Sol system. The Oort cloud stretched before them, a vast sphere of ice and rock that surrounded the distant yellow star like a shell. And Sarvith ordered her sensors to begin detailed scans of everything within. Range report, she commanded from her position on the bridge of the Eternal Conquest. We are detecting billions of objects, the sensor officer replied, his scales flickering with the gray of concentration. Mostly ice bodies ranging from small fragments to objects several hundred kilometers across. Any signs of human activity? Sarvith asked. None that we can detect, the officer said. The humans appear to have no presence this far from their home world, which confirms our intelligence about their primitive level of development. Sarvith nodded with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding exactly as she had anticipated. Humans were confined to their inner system, completely unaware of the doom approaching from the outer darkness, and by the time they detected the fleet, it would be far too late for any meaningful resistance. Maintain current heading and velocity, she ordered. We will reach the inner system in approximately 15 months at our current speed. The fleet sailed on through the frozen wasteland of the outer system, and days passed without incident. Sarvith spent her time reviewing tactical plans and drilling her officers on the procedures they would follow once they reached Earth. She wanted this conquest to be flawless, a demonstration of Valkyrie superiority that would be studied by military academies for generations to come on. The 12th day after entering the Oort cloud, everything changed. Commander, the sensor officer called out, his voice carrying an unusual note of uncertainty. I am detecting an object on intercept trajectory with our fleet. Sarvith turned toward him with sudden interest. What kind of object? She demanded. Unknown, the officer admitted, his scales shifting to the yellow of confusion. It is small, approximately 3 meters in length, and it appears to be artificial in construction. Artificial? Sarvith moved to the sensor station to examine the readings herself. Are you telling me the humans have technology this far from their planet? It would appear so, the officer confirmed. The object is approaching at high velocity on a course that will bring it within visual range of our lead ships in approximately 2 hours. Sarvith studied the sensor data with growing puzzlement according to everything they knew about human technology. This should be impossible. The humans had barely managed to send crew probes to the outer planets of their own system, and those missions had taken years to complete. The idea that they could have deployed functional technology all the way out to the Oort cloud seemed absurd. Could this be a remnant of some ancient civilization? She wondered aloud. Something left behind by a species that preceded the humans? Unknown, the officer repeated, but the object is broadcasting a signal. Show me. Sarvith commanded. The communication array began processing the incoming transmission, and what emerged first was a series of mathematical patterns. Prime numbers arranged in sequences that could only be the product of intelligent design. Then the signal shifted, and to the shock of everyone on the bridge, it began transmitting in crude but recognizable Valkyrie language patterns. Turn back, the message declared. Final warning. Silence fell across the bridge as the officers processed what they had just heard. A human probe, if that was what this thing was, had somehow learned their language and was telling them to leave Sarvith. felt her scales shift to the deep red of anger. They dare to threaten us? She growled. This primitive species sends a single tiny probe to warn off a fleet of 400 warships. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. This was clearly some kind of automated system, probably triggered by their approach. And the humans had apparently programmed it with a bluff that they hoped might scare off potential invaders. It was pathetic. Really. The desperate gesture of a weak species that knew it could not actually defend itself. This changes nothing, Sarveth announced to her bridge crew. The humans knew we were coming, which means they received our declaration of subjugation. But they clearly have no real means of stopping us. She turned to her weapons officer with a dismissive gesture. Destroy the probe, she ordered. I want it reduced to atoms as a message to whoever is watching. Yes. Commander, the weapons officer responded, his claws moving across his console to target the approaching object. The weapon systems of the Eternal Conquest were designed to crack planets and shatter moons. And turning them against a 3-meter probe was almost insulting to their capabilities. Target locked, the weapons officer reported. Firing, a beam of concentrated energy lanced out from the flagship toward the tiny object. The shot was perfect, aimed with precision that would have vaporized a small asteroid, but when the beam reached the location where the probe should have been, there was nothing there. Miss? Sarveth demanded, her voice sharp with disbelief. How could you possibly miss a stationary target? The target was not stationary, the weapons officer replied, his scales pale with shock. It moved, Commander. It moved faster than anything I have ever seen. Where is it now? Sarveth asked. I cannot locate it, the sensor officer admitted. One moment it was there, and then it simply vanished from our sensors. Sarveth stood very still as she processed this information. The probe had not been destroyed, it had not fled, it had simply disappeared, as if it had never existed at all. Find it, she commanded. I want every sensor in this fleet scanning for that object. The order went out to all 400 ships, and thousands of sophisticated detection systems began sweeping the surrounding space. They found nothing. The probe, whatever it had been, was gone without a trace. Erfdi forced herself to remain calm as she considered the implications. The Vehens without a trace forced herself to remain calm as she considered the implications. The Maj considered the implications. The Vied. Humans clearly had more advanced technology than their intelligence reports had suggested. But one small probe with good stealth capabilities did not change the fundamental equation. Her fleet still carried enough firepower to devastate entire worlds. And no amount of clever engineering could stand against that kind of overwhelming force. The probe was obviously designed to gather intelligence on approaching threats. She reasoned aloud. The humans are watching us, trying to learn what they can before we arrive. Should we be concerned, Commander? Her second officer asked. No, Sarveth decided firmly. We should be pleased, actually, because this means the humans are taking our threats seriously. They are frightened, she continued. And frightened prey makes mistakes. She returned to her command chair and settled into it with deliberate confidence. Continue on course, she ordered, and increase our sensor vigilance, because I want to know about any other surprises these humans might have prepared for us. The fleet sailed on, leaving behind the empty space, where the probe had vanished, but Sarveth found herself unable to shake a small feeling of unease that had settled in her chest. The probe's message echoed in her mind, turn back, final warning. Such simple words, delivered with such apparent confidence, almost as if the humans actually believed they could enforce that warning. Sarf dismissed the thought and focused on the mission ahead. The Velkari Dominion had conquered 12 star systems they had broken, civilizations that had stood for millennia. They would not be deterred by a single disappearing probe and a cryptic threat. But somewhere in the darkness of the outer system. Something was still watching, and it had already begun to count down. The first ship vanished 3 days after the probe encounter, and nobody noticed it was gone until the morning status report revealed an anomaly in the fleet formation. "Commander," the communications officer said with obvious confusion, "I am unable to establish contact with the vessel Crushing Victory." Sarvath looked up from her tactical display with mild irritation. "Equipment malfunction?" she asked. "I thought so at first," the officer replied, "but I had now tried all standard and emergency frequencies, and there is no response at all." Sarv, Vithis, felt the first stirring of unease in her stomach. The Crushing Victory was a heavy cruiser, carrying 3,000 crew members and enough weapons to devastate a small moonships like that did not simply stop responding to communications. "Get me a visual on their position," she commanded the main display, shifted to show the location where the Crushing Victory should have been sailing in formation with the rest of the fleet. Space was empty. "Sensor officer," Sarvath said very carefully, "where is the Crushing Victory?" "I do not know, Commander," came the reply. "According to our records, the ship was in position during last night's status check, but I am currently detecting no vessel at those coordinates." "No debris?" Sarvath asked. "No escape pods, no distress signals, no energy signatures." "Nothing," the sensor officer confirmed. "It is as if the ship was never there." The bridge fell into stunned silence as the implications settled over everyone. A heavy cruiser had disappeared without any warning, without any evidence of destruction, without even a cry for help. Ships did not simply vanish even if the Crushing Victory had suffered a catastrophic reactor failure. There would be debris even if they had been destroyed by enemy action. There would be energy signatures from the weapons that killed them, but there was nothing at all, just empty space, where 3,000 Velkari warriors had been sailing only hours before. "I want every ship on high alert," Sarvath ordered, her voice hard with determination. "Full sensor sweeps every hour. And I want visual confirmation of all vessels in the fleet every shift change." The orders went out, and the fleet tightened its formation as nervous captains brought their ships closer together. For 2 days, nothing happened. Ed Sarvath began to wonder if the Crushing Victory had simply suffered some kind of freak accident, a one-in-a-million catastrophe that left no evidence behind. Then the destroyer's Swift Vengeance disappeared, and the supply ship Endless Bounty and the troop carrier Dominion's Pride each time. The pattern was the same: no warnings, no distress signals, no debris, no energy signatures. One moment the ship was there, sailing in formation with its fellows. The next moment it was gone. As if it had never existed, Sarv ordered the fleet into a defensive sphere formation, with the most vulnerable supply ships at the center and the warships forming a protective shell around them. She deployed scouts in all directions, watching for any sign of approaching threats. She had her officers analyze every piece of sensor data they could gather, looking for any pattern that might explain what was happening. They found nothing. The disappearances seemed completely random. Ships vanished from the outer edge of the formation, and from the inner core they vanished during sleep cycles, and during peak activity periods they vanished while being watched on sensors. And while temporarily blocked by other vessels, there was no pattern, no explanation, and no way to predict which ship would be next. Paranoia spread through the fleet like a disease. Crew members began reporting strange readings on their sensors, contacts that appeared and disappeared too quickly to be analyzed. Communications officers claimed to hear whispers in their arrays, voices speaking in languages that no one could identify. Some warriors swore they could see lights moving in the darkness outside their viewports, lights that matched no known configuration of Velkari or human technologies. Sarvath dismissed these reports as fear-induced hallucinations. Dalmatians fleet was under tremendous psychological pressure, and it was natural for frightened minds to start seeing threats everywhere. But privately, she could not explain what was happening to her ships. The science cast had been working continuously since the first disappearance, and they had produced nothing but theories and speculations. For its version, some believed the fleet was passing through a region of unusual spatial phenomena that somehow destroyed vessels without leaving evidence. Others thought the humans had developed some kind of advanced weapon that could vaporize ships instantaneously. A few even whispered that the fleet was being hunted by something that had been lurking in the outer system long before humans had evolved. Commander, the chief scientist says during one of their many briefings, "I must be honest with you, because we have no explanation for these events. That is not acceptable," Sarvith growled. 17 ships have vanished, and I need to know why. We have analyzed every possibility within our scientific understanding, the scientist replied, and none of them fit the evidence, or rather the complete lack of evidence. She hesitated before continuing. "There is one theory that I have been reluctant to voice," she said. "Speak," Sarvith commanded. "Whatever is doing this operates beyond our ability to detect or understand," the scientist said. "It is not simply more advanced than our technology, because it is so far beyond us that we cannot even comprehend what it is doing. You are saying we face an enemy that is essentially godlike compared to us?" Sarvith demanded. "I am saying that we may be facing something that does not consider us a worthy opponent," the scientist replied. "Something that is removing our ships the way we might remove insects from our path, without effort, without concern, and without any need to explain itself." Sarvith rejected this assessment immediately. The Volcari Dominion had conquered 12 star systems. They had never encountered any technology they could not eventually overcome. The idea that something so powerful could exist seemed like defeatist thinking, the kind of cowardice that had no place in a Volcari warrior. "Continue your research," she ordered, "and find me a real explanation." But as the days passed and more ships vanished, Sarvith found herself unable to sleep. She would stand at her viewport and stare out at the darkness, wondering if something was staring back. The fleet pressed on toward Earth, because turning back was unthinkable. They had received their orders from the Supreme Hegemon himself. They would conquer the humans or die trying, but with each disappearance, Sarvith began to wonder if death was even a possibility. The missing ships left no bodies, no evidence that anyone had died. They simply stopped existing, and somehow that was far more terrifying than any battle she had ever fought. By the time the fleet reached the Kuiper Belt, only 383 ships remained. 17 vessels, carrying over 50,000 warriors, had vanished without a trace, and whatever was hunting them showed no signs of stopping. The fleet reached the heliopause after 7 months of travel, crossing the invisible boundary where the solar wind from Earth-Sun finally gave way to the interstellar medium for the Volcari. This point marked their official entry into human territory. Everything from here inward belonged to the Sol system, and Sarvith allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. Despite the losses they had suffered, whatever had been hunting them in the outer darkness, they had survived. Its 66 ships had vanished since the journey began, but 334 vessels remained. And that was still more than enough firepower to conquer a primitive world like Earth. "Begin detailed scans of the inner system," she ordered. "I want to know everything about human infrastructure and defenses before we proceed." The sensor sweeps began immediately, and what they revealed was beyond anything Sarvith had expected. The outer reaches of the Sol system were not empty. Thousands of artificial structures dotted the space around them. Installations scattered across the frozen worlds, an empty void like seeds thrown by a careless hand. There were observation platforms orbiting distant ice bodies, mining operations extracting resources from asteroids and dwarf planets, communication relays and power stations and facilities whose purpose the Volcari sensors could not determine, and every single one of them was dark. They appeared to be abandoned, the sensor officer reported. No power signatures, no life signs, no communication traffic. Just silent structures waiting in the darkness. How is this possible? Sarvith demanded. Our intelligence indicated the humans had barely reached their outer planets. And yet they have infrastructure throughout the entire system. The intelligence appears to have been incomplete. Our second officer suggested carefully. The humans may have been more active in space than their radio broadcasts indicated. Sarvith considered this possibility with growing concern. Probe they had encountered in the Ur cloud had demonstrated technology beyond what they expected from humans. These abandoned installations suggested a level of spacefaring capability that completely contradicted their intelligence reports. Either the humans had advanced very rapidly in the years since the invasion was planned, or they had been concealing their true capabilities all along. Neither possibility was comforting. Send scout ships to investigate the nearest installations, Sarvith commanded. I want to know what these facilities were built for and why they have been abandoned. 3 destroyer-class vessels broke formation and accelerated toward a cluster of structures. Orbiting a large eye spot, Sarvith watched their progress on her tactical display. Tension building in her chest as the scouts approached their targets. The first scout reached an observation platform and reported back immediately. Commander, this facility is definitely of human construction, the scout captain said. We are detecting human text and symbols throughout the interior. What can you determine about its purpose? Sarvith asked. It appears to be a sensor array of some kind, the captain replied. But the technology is decades old by human standards, which makes no sense given how sophisticated these systems actually are. Explain, Sarvith demanded. The design language and materials suggest this platform was built perhaps 50 or 60 Earth years ago, the captain said. But the capabilities we are detecting far exceed anything humans should have been able to create at that time. Either humans were more advanced 50 years ago than we believed, he continued, or someone else built this and made it look like human work. Sarvith did not like either of those possibilities. The B scout ships continued their investigation, moving from structure to structure and transmitting reports back to the fleet. Each facility told the same story: human construction, decades old by apparent age, but incorporating technology that the Valkyrie could not fully understand. Power systems that generated energy through unknown processes, sensor arrays that detected things the Valkyrie did not have names for, and in one station, something that made the reporting scout captain's voice tremble with fear. Commander, he said, I am transmitting an image to you now, and I need you to see this. The image appeared on Sarvith's display, and she felt her scales shift to the pale gray of shock. It was a device, roughly spherical, about 2 meters in diameter, sitting in the center of what appeared to be a research laboratory. The surface of the sphere was covered in patterns that seemed to shift and change even in the static image. And looking at it made Sarvith's eyes hurt in a way she could not explain. What is that? She whispered. We do not know, the scout captain replied. Our sensors cannot determine what it is made of or how it functions. But whatever it is not human. This technology is beyond anything we have ever encountered, he continued. Beyond anything any species we have conquered has ever possessed. And I do not believe humans could have built this, no matter how advanced they secretly are. Then what did build it? Sarvith asked. The scout captain never had a chance to answer. His transmission cut off mid-sentence. And when Sarvith checked her tactical display, his ship had vanished, not destroyed, vanished, just like all the others. 2 remaining scout ships immediately began retreating toward the fleet. But neither of them made it. One disappeared 3 seconds after the first, and the third vanished 4 seconds after that. Sarvith stared at her display as the reality of the situation crashed over her. Whatever was hunting them had not been left behind in the Orc cloud. It was here, in the Sol system proper, and it could take ships at will even when they were under direct observation. All ships. Emergency formation, she commanded, her voice sharp with barely controlled fear. Weapons hot, full defensive protocols. And may the ancestors guide us through whatever comes next. The fleet pulled together into the tightest formation possible. Warships bristling with weapons pointing in every direction. For several hours, nothing happened. Then, with no warning at all, 23 more ships simply ceased to exist. The fleet that had entered the Sol system with 334 vessels now numbered only 308, and they were not even halfway to Earth. The asteroid belt stretched before the diminished fleet like a field of broken stones. Millions of rocky bodies tumbling through their eternal orbits around the distant sun. Sarvith had lost nearly 100 ships since leaving Valkyrie space, and she no longer pretended to understand what was happening. The disappearances continued at irregular intervals, taking vessels without warning or pattern, and nothing she did seemed to make any difference. She had tried every defensive formation in Valkyrie military doctrine. She had deployed sensor drones in expanding spheres around the fleet. She had even ordered ships to fire their weapons randomly into the surrounding space, hoping to hit whatever invisible enemy was stalking them. Nothing worked. Ships vanished whether they were at the center of the formation or the edge. They vanished whether they were moving or stationary. They vanished whether their weapons were active or powered down. The consistent factor was the complete absence of any evidence. No debris, no energy signatures, no distress calls, no bodies, just empty space where thousands of warriors had been moments before. The fleet had crossed into the asteroid belt when the second transmission arrived. Unlike the simple warning from the probe in the Orc cloud, this message was long and complex, and it was delivered in perfect Valkyrie. Attention vessels of the Valkyrie Dominion, the synthetic voice began. Your presence in this system is being noted, and your intentions have been determined. Sarvith immediately ordered all communications recorded and analyzed. But she knew from the first words that this was no ordinary transmission. The voice spoke Valkyrie with an accent that no human should have been able to replicate. Every tone and inflection matching the formal dialect used by Dominion nobility. We address you now not as enemies, but as students of history. The voice continued. For we have studied your people extensively, and we wish you to understand exactly what you have done. What followed was a recitation of Valkyrie crimes that left Sarvith frozen in her command chair. The voice named every species the Dominion had conquered, every world they had burned, every atrocity they had committed across 10,000 years of expansion. It spoke of the Threlonics, a peaceful civilization of artists and philosophers who had been exterminated because they refused to serve as slaves. It spoke of the Morvani, a species of traders and explorers whose entire population had been worked to death in Valkyrie mining operations. It spoke of the Cathari, the Dravosh, the Seleni, and dozens of other names that most Valkyrie had long forgotten. Each conquest was described in precise detail, with dates and locations and numbers of dead that matched Dominion records exactly. You have destroyed 12 civilizations, the voice said. You have ended the existence of species that had existed for millions of years, and you have done so not out of necessity, but out of pride and greed. Your fleet came to this system believing you would add another conquest to your record. The voice continued. You expected to find a primitive species easily crushed beneath your superior technology and numbers. You were wrong. The transmission paused, and when it resumed, The tone had shifted from clinical recitation to something that sounded almost like pity. "The species you call humans have walked among the stars for far longer than you know," the voice said. Their radio broadcasts were not the beginning of their civilization, but a deliberate signal. A call into the darkness to see what might answer. You answered. And now you will learn what humanity truly is. The voice spoke of Earth as it would have become if the Valkyrie had succeeded a dead world. Its oceans boiled away by orbital bombardment. Its cities reduced to radioactive craters. Its people either slaughtered or enslaved. Billion lives erased to satisfy Valkyrie hunger for conquest. That timeline has been rejected, the voice said with terrible finality. Your invasion will not succeed. Your fleet will not reach Earth. And your dominion will learn to fear the darkness between stars. The transmission ended as abruptly as it had begun. Leaving the bridge crew in stunned silence, Sasserveth found that her claws had dug into the arms of her command chair hard enough to crack the material. "Commander," her second officer said quietly, "what do we do?" It was a question Sarvith did not know how to answer. Everything in her training and experience told her to press forward, to complete the mission regardless of the obstacles, to prove the superiority of Valkyrie might against any enemy. But the voice had known things that no outside species should possess it, had recited their history with perfect accuracy, including details that were classified at the highest levels of Dominion security. How could the humans know about the conquest of the Threllenex when that species had been extinct for 3,000 years? How could they know about the Morvani when those records were sealed in the Supreme Hegemon's personal archives? Unless they had been watching. Unless they had been watching for far longer than anyone imagined. "We continue," Sarvith said finally, forcing strength into her voice that she did not feel. "We are Valkyrie, and we do not turn back because of threats and tricks. The humans are trying to frighten us," she continued. "They want us to flee so they do not have to face us in actual battle, because they know they cannot win against our weapons and warriors. This transmission proves only that they are desperate," she concluded. "Desperate enough to try psychological warfare because they have no other options." Her words rang hollow even to her own ears. But duty demanded that she speak them. The fleet pressed on through the asteroid belt, and more ships vanished with each passing day. The warriors who remained had stopped pretending everything was. Normal fear had become a constant companion, visible in the flickering of scales and the trembling of voices. No one spoke of victory anymore. They spoke only of survival, of somehow making it through to engage the enemy in honest battle rather than being picked off one by something they could not see or fight. But Sarvith was beginning to suspect that honest battle was not something they would ever be offered. The humans, or whatever was truly behind this nightmare, did not seem interested in fighting. They seemed interested only in erasing, and there was nothing in Valkyrie military doctrine that told her how to fight an enemy that simply made you stop existing. Only 84 ships remained when the final transmission arrived. Fleet that had set out from Valkyrie space with 400 vessels of conquest had been reduced to a scattered collection of survivors, limping through space beyond the orbit of Mars without any remaining hope of victorious. Veth had stopped issuing tactical orders days ago. There was no point in formations or defensive protocols when the enemy could erase ships at will regardless of what precautions were taken. The warriors who remained simply flew toward Earth because they did not know what else to do. Turning back seemed as likely to result in destruction as pressing forward, at least by continuing. They maintained some illusion of purpose. The transmission began without warning, appearing on every screen and speaker across the surviving fleet simultaneously. It showed Earth, not the tactical view from long-range sensors that Sarvith had studied so many times, but surface images of the planet itself, cities, spread across landscapes of green and blue. Their buildings reaching towards skies filled with clouds. Vehicles moved along roads and through airways in patterns of organized chaos. People walked through streets and parks, going about their daily lives with no apparent awareness of the alien fleet approaching their world. The images were so detailed that Sarvith could see individual faces, children playing in open spaces, their laughter almost audible through the visual feed, adults working and talking and living their ordinary lives, families sharing meals in homes that looked warm and comfortable, 8 billion souls on a single world, completely vulnerable to the weapons that Sarvith still commanded. And yet somehow she knew with absolute certainty that she would never be allowed to harm any of them. The transmission shifted, and what appeared next made Sarvith's blood run cold. It showed a Valkyrie ship, not one of hers, but an older design, a warship configuration that had been standard 300 years ago, but had long since been replaced by more modern vessels. The boss ship was displayed in what appeared to be a museum, mounted on supports in a vast hall alongside other artifacts that Sarvith did not recognize. Placards stood before the ship, and the transmission zoomed in to show the text written there. The words were in a human language, but a translation appeared below them in perfect Valkyrie script. Valkyrie invasion vessel. The placard read, recovered from outer system engagement. First contact incident 2157. Neutralized at Neptune. No survivors. Sarvith stared at the date for a long moment before its significance penetrated her shocked mind. 2157 by the human calendar. That was more than 200 years before the current date. 200 years before the fleet she commanded had even been assembled. 200 years before the Supreme Hegemon had ordered this invasion. The humans had encountered the Valkyrie before. They had destroyed a Valkyrie ship centuries ago and preserved it in a museum like a trophy from some ancient war, and no word of this had ever reached the Dominion. This is not the first time your people have come to our system, the synthetic voice said, returning to narrate the impossible images before her. 217 years ago, a Valkyrie scout vessel entered our space. It was neutralized before reaching the inner planets. We studied it extensively. We learned your language, your history, your methods of conquest, and we prepared for the day when you would return in greater numbers. The transmission showed more images now, scenes that Sarvith realized were recordings of the current invasion, her fleet entering the Oort cloud, her ships vanishing one by one in the outer darkness, the failed attack on the ring structure at Jupiter. Every moment of their doomed journey had been observed and recorded. We knew you were coming before your fleet launched. The voice continued. We detected your preparations as they occurred. We watched you assemble your ships and plan your conquest. And we waited, because we wanted you to come. We wanted your Dominion to send the largest fleet they could spare. We wanted them to learn what happens to species that threaten Earth. Sarvith understood now this had never been an invasion. It had been an execution. That the humans had allowed the fleet to come because they wanted witnesses. They wanted survivors who could return to Valkyrie space and report what had happened. They wanted the Dominion to know exactly what awaited any future attempt at conquest. Your Supreme Hegemon will receive a message when your survivors return home. The voice said. He will see everything that has happened to his fleet. He will understand that Earth is not a world to be conquered. And if he is wise, he will never send ships in this direction again. The transmission ended, leaving Sarvith alone with the terrible knowledge of what she had led her warriors into. She had believed herself the hunter, bringing superior force to crush a primitive species. Instead, she had been the prey, allowed to enter a trap that had been prepared centuries before her birth. The humans had not defeated the Valkyrie, had simply decided that a certain number of ships would be permitted to survive, and there was nothing Sarvith could do except accept that permission and try to bring her people home. She opened a channel to the surviving ships, all vessels. She said, her voice hollow with defeat. Prepare to reverse course and begin the journey back to Valkyrie space. Commander? A voice responded. Are we abandoning the mission? There is no mission, Sarvith replied. There never was, and we were fools to believe otherwise. She looked one last time at the distant blue dot that was Earth. So small and fragile looking from this distance, so utterly harmless in appearance, and so completely, terrifyingly beyond anything the Valkyrie could challenge. May our ancestors forgive us, she whispered, for we have looked upon the face of something greater than ourselves and been found wanting. Jupiter dominated the viewports as the remnants of the fleet approached. A swirling giant of storms and clouds that dwarfed anything the Valkyrie had encountered in their home system. The gas giant's immense gravity had shaped this region of space, capturing dozens of moons and countless smaller objects in its eternal embrace, but it was not Jupiter itself that held Sarvith's attention. It was what orbited the giant planet, a ring of artificial structures stretched around Jupiter, in a band that spanned thousands of kilometers. Installations so vast that they made the Valkyrie flagship look like a speck of dust. Each individual station was larger than the largest space habitat the Dominion had ever constructed together. They represented an engineering achievement that should have been impossible for any civilization, and unlike the abandoned platforms they had found in the outer system, these structures were active energy readings, poured off them in quantities that overwhelmed Valkyrie. Sensors' power signatures unlike anything in there. Database pulsed through the ring in patterns that suggested coordinated operation. Light flickered between stations in sequences that could only be communication or data transfer. This is human construction? Sarvith whispered, staring at the display with all four eyes. The design language matches human aesthetics, her science officer reported, her voice hollow with shock. But the scale and capability exceed anything we believed humans could achieve. This is not the work of a primitive species, the officer continued. This is the work of a civilization that has been spacefaring for thousands of years at minimum. Sarvith understood now why the intelligence reports had been so wrong. The humans had not been screaming their presence into the void like ignorant children. They had been baiting a trap. The radio signals that drew the Valkyrie across the stars were not the product of a young civilization just discovering the cosmos. They were a lure designed to attract exactly the kind of predatory species that the Dominion represented, and the Valkyrie had taken the bait. Commander, the tactical officer said urgently, the ring structure is changing, and energy levels are increasing across all stations. Sarvith watched the readings climb beyond anything her instruments could properly measure. Whatever the ring was designed to do, it was preparing to do it now. She had a choice to make. She could order the fleet to retreat, to flee back through the system they had crossed at such terrible cost, and hope that whatever was hunting them would let them go. Or she could attack. Every instinct developed over a career of conquest told her that the only way to survive was to strike first, to destroy this impossible structure before it could be turned against her fleet. All warships, target the ring structure, she commanded. Maximum firepower, concentrated barrage. Fire on my mark. Her officers hesitated for just a moment before moving to obey. They were Valkyrie warriors, and warriors followed orders, even when those orders seemed suicidal. The fleet had been reduced to 298 ships, but 91 of those were dedicated warships carrying enough combined firepower to devastate a planet. If anything could destroy the ring structure, it was the massed weapons of a Valkyrie battle fleet. All ships report ready, the tactical officer announced. Serv took a deep breath and spoke the word that would decide everything. Fire. 91 warships unleashed their weapons. simultaneously beams of concentrated energy, missiles carrying fusion warheads, kinetic projectiles accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. A wall of destruction raced toward the ring structure. Enough firepower to crack continents and boil oceans. The weapons reached their targets, and then they did not. Sarvath watched in disbelief as her attack simply ceased to exist. There was no impact, no explosion, no evidence that the weapons had ever been fired. The beams did not splash against shields or dissipate against armor. They simply stopped being real, as if someone had decided they should never have existed. In the first place, what happened? She demanded. Where did our weapons go? Unknown, the tactical officer replied, his voice trembling. They just disappeared, Commander. The same way our ships have been disappearing. Before Sarvath could respond, the ring structure acted. Light pulsed from the stations in a synchronized wave, spreading outward like ripples on a pond. The light passed through the fleet in an instant, too fast to track or avoid, and in its wake, 91 warships ceased to exist, not destroyed, erased, gone as if they had never been the remaining ships. The supply vessels and troop carriers that had not participated in the attack floated in stunned silence where moments before a battle fleet had surrounded them. Sarvath stared at her tactical display, which now showed only 207 ships where there had been 298. The ring structure had eliminated her entire attack force in less than a second. It had not damaged them or disabled them. It had simply decided they should not exist anymore, and it had made that decision reality. All ships scatter. Sarvath screamed into the communication system. Break formation and run. The survivors needed no encouragement. Vessels fled in every direction, abandoning any pretense of military discipline in their desperate attempt to escape. Sarvath watched them go, knowing that it probably would not matter if the humans could erase ships at will. Then running was just delaying the inevitable. But she was a Valkyrie warrior, and warriors did not surrender. They fought until they could fight no more. And then they died with honor. Set course for Earth, she commanded her bridge crew. Maximum velocity, all power to engines, Commander. Her second officer questioned, You still intend to continue the mission? I intend to see this through to whatever end awaits us, Sarvath replied grimly. If I am to be erased from existence, I will be erased while still moving toward my objective. The eternal conquest accelerated toward the inner system, leaving Jupiter and its impossible ring structure behind. Sarvath did not know how many of her ships would follow her. She did not know if any of them would reach Earth, but she knew that she would not stop until something stopped her. It was all she had left. Supreme Hegemon Thalvex sat upon his throne on Velkar Prime, surrounded by advisors who had fallen completely silent. The transmission from Fleet Commander Sarvath played on the great display before them, and every word carved deeper wounds into Valkyrie pride. They are everywhere around us now, Sarvath reported, her voice steady despite everything she had endured. Human vessels emerged from concealment as we began our retreat, and there must be hundreds of them forming a sphere around what remains of the fleet. The display showed what her ship's sensors detected, craft of designs the Valkyrie had never imagined. Vessels that seemed to shift and change as they moved. Hulls that reflected light in ways that hurt the eyes. They were not warships, at least not in any configuration that Thalvex recognized. They carried no visible weapons, projected no hostile energy signatures, made no threatening movements. They simply watched. They are not attacking, Sarvath continued. They are observing us, Commander, studying us like specimens in a laboratory. Can you break through their formation? Thalvex demanded, knowing the question was foolish even as he asked it. We have not attempted to, Sarvath replied. After what happened to Jupiter, I do not believe our weapons would have any effect. and I will not waste more lives on futile gestures. The advisors shifted uncomfortably at this statement. No Valkyrie commander had ever refused to attack an enemy, regardless of the odds, but none of them spoke to criticize Sarth. Images from her journey had shown them enough to understand that normal rules no longer applied. A new vessel is approaching, Sarvith reported. It is much larger than the others, and it is broadcasting a request to communicate. With you? Thalvex asked. With you? Supreme Hegemon, Sarvith clarified. They know you are watching, and they want to speak to you directly. Thalvex gestured for his communication officers to accept the incoming signal. The display shifted, and for the first time in Valkyrie history, a human face appeared before the Supreme Hegemon. It was not what Thalvex had expected. The human looked ordinary, unremarkable. A soft creature with smooth skin and small features that conveyed nothing of the power its species apparently wielded. But the eyes held something that made Thalvex want to look away. Depth of knowledge. A weight of years that seemed wrong for such a short-lived species. Supreme Hegemon Thalvex, the human said, speaking perfect Valkyrie with the ease of a native speaker. I am Ambassador Chun, and I speak for the people of Earth. You have destroyed my fleet, Thalvex growled. What more do you want? We have not destroyed your fleet, the ambassador replied calmly. We have contained it, and we have chosen to allow survivors so that your people might learn from this experience. Learn what? Thalvex demanded. That you are more powerful than us, that you can crush our ships without effort, that we should cower before your might. No, the ambassador said, and something like sadness crossed those alien features. We want you to learn that the universe is not what you believe it to be. Your species chose conquest because you believed the cosmos was hostile. The ambassador continued. You assumed that every civilization you encountered would either submit or be destroyed, because you could not imagine any other way of existing. You were wrong. The universe is not hostile, the ambassador said. It is indifferent, and most species who reach the stars eventually learn to cooperate rather than conquer. Because cooperation leads to survival and conquest leads to extinction. Your dominion has survived for 10,000 years, through violence and subjugation, the ambassador continued. But you have also stunted your own growth, because you never learned from the civilizations you destroyed, and you never gained the knowledge that comes from true exchange between equals. We offer you no alliance, the ambassador said. You have not earned that, and your crimes against sentient life are too great to be easily forgiven. But we offer you this chance. Go home. Tell your people what you found here. Tell them that the Sol system is close to conquest, that Earth and its people are protected by powers your dominion cannot comprehend. And if your people are wise, they will turn their energies away from expansion and toward understanding. There are wonders in this galaxy beyond anything your conquerors have imagined, the ambassador said. Civilizations that have existed for millions of years. Knowledge that could transform your species in ways you cannot currently conceive. But none of it will ever be yours if you continue on your current path. The choice is yours to make. The transmission ended, and Ambassador Chun's face disappeared from the display. Thulvev sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything he had witnessed. His fleet of 400 ships had been reduced to 84. More than 300,000 warriors had simply ceased to exist, and the humans had done it without ever engaging in actual combat. They had erased his forces the way he might swat an annoying insect, without effort, without concern, and apparently without any satisfaction. Supreme Hegemon, one of his advisors, ventured, "What are your orders?" Thalvex looked at the advisor with all four eyes. "We recall the survivors," he said finally. "We welcome them home as heroes who faced an impossible enemy and lived to tell the tale." "And the humans?" the advisor asked. "Do we prepare another fleet? A larger force that might succeed where this one failed? No, Palvex said, and the word felt like ashes in his mouth. We do not speak of the humans again, and we do not send ships in their direction. And we hope that they are content to let us be. He rose from his throne and walked toward the great window that overlooked his capital city, somewhere out there. Among the stars he had always seen his territory to be claimed. There were powers that made the Velkari Dominion look like children playing at wars. Universe was larger and stranger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined, and for the first time in 10,000 years. The Velkari would have to learn humility. Serveth's final message arrived 1 hour later. They are letting us leave, she reported. 12 ships have been designated as the survivors who will return home. And the humans say they want us to remember what happened here. 12 ships from 400, she continued. 3% of our force allowed to carry the warning back to our people. We are departing now, she concluded. And I do not know what future awaits us or our dominion. But I know this much with absolute certainty. We will never threaten Earth again. The communication ended, and Palvex gave orders for the survivors to be escorted home with full honors when they arrived. The 12 ships would become monuments to Velkari overreach. Their crews would become teachers, spreading the lesson of what happened when predators encountered something further up the food chain and in the most sacred archives of the Dominion, where only the supreme hegemon could access the records. One phrase was recorded untranslated in the human tongue, a phrase that Sarvith had included in her final report, something the humans had transmitted to the survivors as they began their long journey home. The phrase was informal, almost crude, and it captured the human attitude toward the invasion in just 5 small words. Fuck around and find out. The Velkari Dominion would remember that phrase for as long as their civilization endured, and they would never forget the lesson that came with it. Some prey was not meant to be hunted, some worlds were not meant to be conquered, and some species have been waiting in the darkness between stars for far longer than anyone could imagine. Humanity was one of those species, and Earth was protected